Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Goram, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay then, today I am shaking things up a bit with a conversation that might just challenge everything you think you know about employee engagement. If you've ever been involved in an employee engagement survey, you know the drill. Numbers go up, celebrations ensue, numbers dip, and it's time to scramble for a fix. They're now bored of beanbags. We clearly need more fruit and a new coffee machine. But here's the thing. What if chasing that elusive engagement score is actually taking us in entirely the wrong direction? My guest today is Nick Court, the founder and CEO of the People Experience Hub, and he's here to tell us why 2024 needs to be the year we go beyond the score. Nick believes that we've been so focused on those numbers that we've lost sight of what really matters, understanding the behaviors, experiences, and feelings that truly shape workplace culture. So let's get real. Are we simply ticking boxes and patting ourselves on the back for a high score, or are we digging deeper to understand what's really driving or stalling our people's engagement? And is even that the thing that we should be measuring? What if we've been doing it wrong all along? In today's episode, I hope we'll explore these questions and more. We'll unpack why the traditional approach to employee engagement might not be moving the dial like we think it is. After all, globally, engagement numbers haven't budged significantly in decades. Despite all the surveys, despite all the money that's spent on it, spent all the effort, so something, somewhere, isn't right. So what does it take to design, to grow and maintain a workforce that's not just engaged, but really thriving? How do we know what the key elements are to achieving that outcome, and how should we measure our progress in working our way towards that? So, buckle up, as I think Nick's about to flip the script on everything we thought we knew about engagement. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Andy, welcome for having me on here. It's exciting. I'm excited, and it is exciting. So, yeah, looking forward to jumping into this.
Yeah, me too, mate. Me too. Now, before we start, just so everybody gets on the same page, just do us a favour, my friend. Just give us a little bit of insight into you and your background and perhaps the origins of the People Experience Hub.
I came into the world of HR for a slightly different route to others, which is I came in from an operational background. And, you know, more than that, I came in from actually from a trade union background. So I started my life working in a warehouse, and I was a trade union rep for years, and then I was a trade union official, was a branch chair. You know, so I got into the concept of how we should be treating people at work through, number one, experiencing it, and number two, supporting trade union members and Tesco employees. So I very much came into it that way. And I had the opportunity to go into a payroll team. The HR director at the time said to me, you know more about our policies and procedures than so many other people do in the organization. And payroll is simply taking those policies and procedures and turning them into transactional elements like pay. So I did that, found out I had an affinity for payroll, affinity for HR systems. And, you know, from there I progressed. I then left and went for Associated British Foods. So I got from retail into food manufacturing, where I looked after so kind of HR shared services, reward, benefits, global mobility. Went from there to Carlsberg. And then I realized, like, I've gone from a 400,000 person company to a large company to a 1,800 person company. And I decided to set out on my own, went out and did a consultancy role. And then that's where the People Experience Hub concept came along, I sat with my business partner, Ben, at the time. We were looking at, what we felt was wrong in the world and or wasn't quite working, probably more than anything. And we said one of the things around colleague surveys, as people surveys, is it feels a little bit like tail wagging the dog, like the supplier of the survey is telling you how to do it, telling you what the measure is, telling you the question to ask, and not really understand the experience. And that's where we went out to solve it. And that's where the People Experience Hub was born.
Fantastic. And it's clearly doing great stuff. You've just received a finalist kind of nomination for the People Pioneers for 2024.
Yeah,
Congratulations on that. That's great.
Culture Pioneers. It's the Culture Pioneers Award is for brand. So it's about, does our external brand and our internal brand match up? When we walk the walk and talk the talk, do the two things come together? So delighted to have been a finalist for that.
Oh, I think that say-do gap is so important when it comes down to people and culture and really, really delivering this kind of thriving environment we're hopefully going to talk about today. Now, back early in the day, I had your friend and colleague, Rob Robson, come on and totally blow my mind by asking him this very simple question, which I'll ask to you, which was, from your perspective, Nick, when we talk about employee engagement, what are we referring to?
So it's Rob, and I'm going to be careful here because I don't want to be competing against what Rob does. Rob's far more intelligent than I am. Okay, I feel my intelligence comes through my feet. It comes like where I am, where I'm walking, and all that stuff, and my life experience. So when I think about employee engagement, I understand if I'm engaged in something, right? I understand that when I go into a shop, am I more engaged in Coke or Pepsi, right? I know what I'm engaged in. I know how I feel that day. Yeah. And I think that we can risk overcomplicating what is effectively, what is engagement? The answer is, well, what does an engaged employee look like in your organization? What does an engaged employee look like to you? What does someone who is engaged, what does their behavior look like? What do you expect somebody who's engaged to do? You expect them to be responding and responsive. You expect them to advocate and be advocating. You expect them to align with what you're doing. And that we've got to think that engagement ultimately is a set of things, but ultimately it's about motivation. When I walk past 3 restaurants on the high street, which is the one I'm most engaged with, which is the one that gives me a great experience, and the experience leads to engagement. So I'm deliberately, by the way, keeping this vague because the problem of locking engagement down to one thing and then going at it means that we are going at a social norm and we are ignoring any differences that there may be in the world. And when we go at a social norm, think about what social normative groups are, we end up at a risk of what is employee engagement for white middle-aged men. And what we have to look at is an engaged employee is likely to do the following things. It's likely to behave like this. And it's the behaviors we're looking for. So I've deliberately not answered your question.
You have answered my question. You've just done it differently to Rob. Rob, just absolutely did my brain in a good way.
Yeah.
And what you've done is you've taught my language, Nick, which is
amazing.
I'm far more comfortable with. And maybe this is the problem. I mean, measurement is going to be at the heart of what we end up talking about today. Because we can talk about alignment and we can talk about behavior and we can talk about differences. Somewhere in there, organizations are trying to measure something. And the fewer things we measure, I guess, the more comfortable we feel. Oh, look, it's that thing, right? But if that is the case, what are we doing wrong at the moment? Because I mentioned, and depending which survey you look at, right, numbers go up, numbers go down. I think it's reasonably well understood that globally that number's been pretty static, pretty stagnant, right, around engagement. Organizations are different, countries might be different. Globally, it's not really changed much. So what's wrong? What's happening with this measurement thing? What are we doing wrong, Nick?
I think there's there's no harm in having a concept of engagement and having a concept of a number to help us understand if we are heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately that's what's been lost. And if we were to go to an organization, we'll go to HelloFresh, right? So HelloFresh that has a huge technology arm,
yep,
a huge commercial business arm, and then a huge production arm. And you were to talk to them about what does employee engagement look like, it must look different in different parts of their business, right?
That's the reason.
Yeah. So to then have an overarching measure that tries to span all of that is almost impossible just in one organization. So what we see going wrong is that there's a couple of things, I think. So number one is chasing the benchmark. So the benchmark becomes the score becomes the goal, and the obsession on the goal becomes the driver of behaviors. And, if all you have to do is increase your engagement score from 72% to 73%, then what will you do? And will you do it in a sustainable way? And will you do it in a way that is understood by everybody? And will you declare that when you get to 74%, because the benchmark provided by, the wisdom in the world, which is the data that people have decided to share, will you then stop? And ultimately, you can't sit there and say, we're going to design an experience that people can interact with for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and do it in the same way that a retailer may design an experience for somebody who's going to come in once a week. It's different. So that whole customer experience and employee experience, we can learn so much. We can learn a bit. But designing something that's going to take up a third of people's lives and be so influential is something that you can't stop when you hit the goal. And I think that's one of the big problems is employee engagement creates an employee engagement benchmark, which locks people into a concept of engagement, which locks people into 6 questions that are the engagement questions. And then we chase the benchmark. And what we do is we limit ourselves on things that are not engagement. So what does an organization want? Employee engagement. Of course, it wants employee engagement. That's a nice measure of, are people motivated? Are they engaged? But they want their people to be well, right? So well-being must be a measure of an outcome. They want people to be innovative. They want people to be ready for change. They want people to be motivated and motivational. They want people to be productive. So there's so many things that they want for their people and of their people that engagement can only ever be a small subset of that. So there's a real risk that says when engagement is the only score you're chasing or the only goal in town, you're racing to the benchmark and you're comparing yourself. HelloFresh is comparing themselves to Sainsbury's and comparing themselves to Barclays and comparing themselves to different industries across different groups with different experiences. When if you just ask the question, what do we want of our people? What do we need to give them? What does an engaged person look like here? And what are our expectations of outcomes like innovation, change readiness, and well-being? You start asking far broader questions. And if my original answer to what is engagement is vague, that's because engagement is vague. It's nebulous as a concept, and therefore trying to chase it sometimes can feel like you're batting away at clouds and mist. It's
especially if you're chasing the wrong things, especially if we're going down the wrong paths. If the information or the data we're getting, I guess, isn't nuanced enough, isn't asking the right sort of questions to get the outcomes that we're looking for and that people need. And I think also at this point, and the dangers, perhaps discuss a bit more about the dangers of being obsessed with a score, is that this isn't like a PlayStation game. I don't think that I've got to 75, therefore I've completed engagement. Right. What's the next game? Because this is an ongoing quest, right? Involving in culture. It's a never ending thing. You've constantly got to work on it to keep it, to maintain it, to grow it. People come in and people go. Things change, dynamics change, right? It's a living beast. So even the context of engagement must change over time, right? With business focus changing and perhaps industry changing.
Yeah, it has to. And when you look at the most innovative organizations or innovative brands, what do? They buck the trends.
Mm.
They go different. They do more, right? And they obviously need to understand what they want to be. But if your focus is only on engagement, then your focus can't also be on being a better business, on helping our people create a better business for us and our customers and our stakeholders. And I think there's a broader set that needs to be looked at here. And ultimately, we can also get into the concept that is, do HR have a seat at the table? Right. So where does employee engagement sit within an organization? Typically, the transactional running of surveys and starting to pull strategy sits within the HR or the people teams. My experience when we have stood up in front of boards and we talk about engagement, because it is such a nebulous concept, because no one can say, when you do this, you get that. It's about, well, we must increase our engagement score. And it's like, well, what's important to you? And when you say to a CEO or a CFO, we can improve retention, we can increase productivity, we can improve motivation, we can increase advocacy, your promoters in your internal organization. It's more solid. Yeah, but our obsession with wrapping all of that up into one concept of engagement has become quite high. And I think if organizations were focused on designing an experience for our people to deliver for our customers and consumers, you end up with the 1950s thinking of the service profit chain.
There's a bit of me, still rose-tinted glasses, that just loves the concept of the service profit chain, right? I think it lives and breathes, and we can overcomplicate things or try and change them. That's still at the heart of it all. Happy employees, happy customers, happy shareholders. Ray, off we go. All good. I wonder whether some of this measurement issue is a quest for simplicity, so driven by communication above all else, rather than actual outcome. So we need to be able to tell people how engaged people are in this business. Therefore, we need something really simplistic, and the easier we can make it to understand, as in a number, well, then more people will comprehend what it is. The reality is something that doesn't do anything. That probably has just more questions. Maybe even something like Net Promoter Score is like the devil, right? We've got this one number. It tells us everything. What on earth does it tell us?
But it's a great example because the guy who invented NPS, the Net Promoter Score, regrets doing it. He's publicly came out and said he regrets creating the one score you need to manage your business, which is Net Promoter. Would I recommend this company to my friends and family? And that means from a consumer perspective. And it wasn't long before people co-opted that into the eNPS, the Employee Net Promoter Score. And so it's like, okay, so you are Nike with millions of consumers and millions of data points, and you want to get one question, but you employ 1,000 people. But you now want to try and take that same concept to 1,000 people. Would I recommend this as a great place to work? And are you a detractor or a promoter? And when you look at McKinsey, you look at someone else talking about NPS, the one danger of NPS is it asks, what would you do? Not what did you do? What do you do? What would you do? It's a measurement of your perceived intent to do something, not your opportunity to do it. So it doesn't ask you, do you have the opportunity to recommend someone to this brand or this organization? It says, would you if you had the opportunity? Not did you, and have you in the last however long? And it then takes you away from the rest of your business. So when you see businesses that have struggled, who have these measurements, they don't understand, but we have a good NPS or a good eNPS. And it's like, but that's not the only thing.
Yeah.
You can't measure every part of your people, and your people KPIs based on whether they would recommend you as a great place to work.
There's a number of pitfalls there, I think, with the measures. Look, I've used eNPS. I'm not here trying to sort of like say I haven't. I have, but I guess I've seen the light on those sort of things. But also, like if I'm doing facilitation work, right? Let's say I'm running a leadership development course. There's a survey at the end of that program for all the delegates to take. And, was it engaging and fun and all those sort of good questions that are coming through? I know if I've had a really challenging group and I've had to challenge them to get them to think, to move forward, I know more often than not, in the moment, my scores may be lower than I would like because it's been an uncomfortable session. However, I also know that 6 months down the line, I get emails from people saying, that time I didn't like you very much for pushing me. Actually, I'm now kind of seeing why
and
you
I've
did
recommended you to 10 people who I've said it would be great. And I think this is the important thing when we talk about something like NPS is the difference between the question you're asking and the measurement you apply. And this is which was back into this, which is I don't have any problem at all with asking somebody, would you recommend us to your friends and family as a great place to work? If we had a vacancy, would you refer your friend to come and work here? It's a great indicator of engagement. It's a great measure of that. What I have a real issue is probably this 11-point scale that says, are you a detractor or a promoter? Is it plus 50, minus 100?
Yeah.
Because it gives no one anything to go on. And, the third thing is it cannot be your only score. Yeah, my experience of the training that I had with you, the environment was one that was conducive to learning, to change. The materials I had that I had to work with enabled me to take part. The preemptive work enabled me to understand what's happening. Was it uncomfortable? Maybe. Would I recommend you? Ask me again in 6 months.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is good, but you've got to look at it in the round to understand the full experience.
Absolutely. And so that's what I want to kind of drill into. So we've talked about outcomes and trying to understand the various outcomes or even the specific outcomes that we're looking for to sort of see, well, are the people inside the business thriving? Have they got an opportunity to do their best thing, bring their best self, share their efforts, contribute in some sort of way? So in the quest for simplicity, maybe we've gone down the wrong path, right? Maybe we're starting to look at okay measures, not the most useful measures, because we haven't really thought about the outcomes that we're looking for. And so maybe we're doing employee engagement wrong. Maybe we've led down a garden path. And if we follow the wrong scores and the wrong measures, we're going to do the wrong things. And so in the work that you're doing, which from what I have seen out there is different, and even back in the day when I talked to Rob, this stuff was being thought about and trialed and tested, but now it's out there. I want you to tell us about the PX3 model, the sort of think, feel, do model. What is it? What is it attempting to do, and how does it work?
So PX3 looks effectively at broader concepts than engagement. So it looks at outcomes, people outcomes. So if you think about the 3 levels we're looking at, I'm going to go 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
So 3 is people outcomes. And of course, you can have a rolled up engagement measure in that. But ultimately, we're looking at things like outcomes like retention, intention to stay, motivation, well-being. Can people be well in your organization? And innovation, readiness for change. So all of these things are outcomes. And when we think about outcomes, you've got to think about the things that are desirable for your people as an organization, because when these outcomes happen, you do well as an organization. So you're winning. And the outcomes you want for your people because you care about them. You want your people to be well, not just because when they're well, they'll do more productive work, because, that's ultimately might be someone feels like that in the organization. But, a caring organization wants their people to be well. They want their people to be motivated. They want their people to be ready for any change that's coming. Yeah. So there's a balance there between organizational needs and organizational wants for their people. So there's a balance there. Number 3. Number 2 is the felt experience. So that comes under feel. So where number 3 is outcomes, which is what are people likely to do. Number 2 is the felt experience. And this is how do people feel? And here where we what we put in here are things like the feelings of autonomy, belonging, the feelings of connection and enjoyment. So if you think about these as meeting the fundamental human needs that we have. And number one is the perceived environment. So this is the think part of think, feel, do. And the perceived environment is how people perceive the environment around them. I believe that my manager cares for me. I think that the communications are adequate. I think that I receive recognition. I think as an organization, we're doing everything we can to be sustainable. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to take a concept then, which is we can draw a line between those. Because the only thing you can do as an organization is tackle the area of think. So when you look at that and you go, how do people think is the only area that I can influence. You can't tell people how to feel, and you can't demand an outcome for long. Maybe you can demand an outcome in a real control environment, but
not
you can't
sustainably.
demand.
Not sustainably, no.
So the two things you can't control, we measure and we understand, and then we measure the thing you can control because that's the lever you can pull. So when we say think, feel, do, we're now able to do that. And why did we go down this route rather than a classic way of measuring engagement or looking at standard approaches, which are all fine as well in their own space? It was because it gave us richer. So we see this as the next evolution. We see this as, the model, the framework of engagement plus one, and if you look at what other people are doing, what we saw was you'd end up with this huge list that said people who feel they belong are 12 times more likely to be engaged. Okay. I can't tell them I can't demand they feel that they belong. I can't demand that. But so how does that work?
Yeah.
And then they'd say things like people who enjoy their job are more likely to be engaged. People who feel connected are more likely to be engaged. And when you looked at the list, and it was a stacked list, so it was a nice stacked list of the questions and concepts we asked, then what we saw was all of those felt experience, the feelings just came straight up to the top. Yeah, of course they do. Feelings are important. Feelings drive us. Feelings drive us every single day. But they're things that an organization can't do anything about. So the concept of PX3, think, feel, do, is actually to say to organizations, it's important to understand the feelings, but let's show you what you can actually do. What can you actually influence? What can you change? Put more resources in it, change training, physically change the environment. What can you change that will best predict an outcome? And we end up then with a model that says, if you want your people to do something, they should feel this and they should think that.
Which I think this is the big difference between what you might call a traditional survey, which is why I want you to come on and explain this stuff today. Because to me, there's a couple of things I want to just make sure I understand. Firstly, the clear, obvious thing for me is there's the emergence of why outcomes happen, which is really what, if we think about it, it's really what we want out the back of any survey, whether it's engagement or not. Do you know what? I want to know why something's happening, please. Not, I just want to know something is happening. I want to know why something's happening. And the three levels you just talked about get to a point of understanding why something is happening, right? Which should then inform where you go and put your focus and your energy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you think about the concept you just talked about, which is understanding the why. So if you think about something like when somebody releases a statement of fact, which is their fact, which is according to our data, belonging is super important in an organization. And people who feel they belong are more likely to be engaged. Then where do we put our efforts and resources? We put our efforts and resources into things that we think might impact the feeling of belonging. So we might do, we do more diversity training. We might do something around changing our recruitment approach, changing our policies. We might do some stuff around training, development, whatever that might be. And we might do some things around gender pay gap. We might do all this stuff, and we're tackling diversity to drive up belonging. And that's laudable, by the way. So that is something every organization should do. You shouldn't have any practices in your business that exclude people. Why would you want to do that? But when we look at the data and we say, actually, using a multi-step model, when people feel they belong, it's because they're recognized. It's because they have great recognition. They have appreciation. They are appreciated at their work. It's because their manager cares about them. So line manager capability and attitude is very important to someone feeling they belong. It's because they receive the communication they need to do their job at the time they need to do their job. So they are kept up to date. You respect me enough to keep me up to date on what we're doing. And when you look at that and you go, well, that makes sense. We're complex individuals. I want to know that I work for an organization that values diversity. I want to know I work for an organization that is actively challenging its things like gender pay and owing on a program. I want that. But when I feel I belong, it's because I'm treated with respect. I'm recognized when I do good work. And I feel like the environmental factors celebrate. So it's a different path that somebody would go on to influence something we want for our people.
And when you mentioned before in the 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3 layers, we've talked about belonging here as one factor.
Yeah.
Now, are those factors standard in every survey, or are you looking at what an organization is struggling with, trying to achieve, wanting to achieve? Are those things flexing? Are there some core things that are always there, but occasionally you bring some other things in? How's that work?
So flexibility within a framework is probably the best mantra for PX3.
Yeah.
So it's the framework that allows you to have confidence that you can benchmark, that you can understand how you are against other people and how you are in your own organization. The felt experience is very is probably the area that we are locking more than anything, because concepts of belonging, autonomy, connection, and growth don't really change much, and there's not that many questions you need to ask in that space.
Yeah.
So what we do is we take, what are the outcomes you're looking for your people? What does an engaged employee look like here? What are the outcomes you want? Well, we're an innovative organization. I want to drive innovation. So how do we do that? And what we then look at with our organizations, so we create those outcomes they're looking for. We then go and look at the environmental. Do they have any concerns? Do they have anything that they think already is worrying them that we can start exploring with our surveys and with our data? We start bringing that through. And we will then work with that organization to create the right survey to do that. And our surveys have limitations. So surveys cannot be your only employee listening tool.
No, not at all.
You have to give your people a voice in many different channels. But surveys allow you to capture data and then analyze that data. And PX3 ultimately is a predictive analytics solution. So we are looking to best predict what environmental factor will predict a positive outcome. So, and I can give you an example of that if that's helpful.
Yeah,
so,
go for it.
If we look at something like intention to stay, what we can pull through from that for an organization is, and this is the top level of our data, we can say something like, if you want your people to stay, they should feel that they can reach their full potential, they can develop their career, and they belong. And they should think that senior leaders care about people, good work is recognized, success is celebrated, and they're kept up to date. And what we can effectively turn this then into as a formula. We've got one client, a hospitality client, who calls it their formula. And they go out to people and say, this is a retention formula.
Yeah.
So these are the things that environmentally drive retention. These are there's 8 things. These are the 4 things that are low scoring. These are the 4 things that are high scoring. The high scoring ones we are going to celebrate. We're going to protect. We're going to get out there and say, well done to everyone's doing it well. The 4 things that are not so great for us as an organization, those are the things that we're going to take action on. So if you think about predictive analytics, it then leads to action in the right place for the right outcome. And what we can then do is really target that down and say to people, if you want this, go do this. So none of that 40 questions, let's tackle the lowest scoring. It's 40 questions, and these are the 4 that you really need to work on in central London restaurants. Different in Manchester. So 3 of the 4 are the same, but there's another one that's creeped in. So in Manchester, go and do this. And start really flipping that round a little bit.
I think that's the thing that I like about this whole concept, because to me it feels different, because it feels like future action focused as opposed to a retrospective view of what's happening or happened.
Yeah, definitely. And and because it's broader than engagement, what we're finding is when we are sitting in front of boards, so we're often representing our data and our insights in front of the boards for our clients, we're finding that the naturally cynical people, apologies to every CEO and CFO out there right now, but the naturally cynical people for engagement are suddenly engaged in what we're telling them. Because when you say to a CFO that the number one cost challenge you have from a people perspective is retention, it's costing you somewhere between £3,000 and £10,000 for every leaver, more if you look at some broader data, but let's fix around that. It's costing you over £1 million a year for the headcounts that you're losing. And we can actually show you what best predicts intention to stay and where you're scoring low on that best prediction. The last time we did this presentation, CFO sat there and said, this is a game changer. I know how to help my HR team. I know how to help my colleague, my chief people officer, when they're asking for budget and they're asking for training and development budget, line management development budget. This company has just showed us that line management capability and training is a retention driver.
There we go. And and in most organizations, that is a huge number, relatively speaking, right? That the cost of ineffective retention or turnover or poor leadership, meaning you're losing people, whatever. This is what I mean about getting under the why and really focusing on, actually, we've got this big number that's costing us in lost productivity or turnover of people, having to retrain the basics, all that kind of good stuff. This will absolutely pay back dividends, right?
Yeah, and we don't want to. It's not. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's be dead honest with everyone. Engagement is an amazing concept. It's a known concept. We are never going to move away from the terminology of employee engagement, but moving to what does an engaged employee look like here really matters. And being your organization, I saw a statement about the problem with external benchmarking, of any benchmarking, is it's a race to mediocrity, right? Because you are an exceptional organization that wants to do exceptional things, and yet you're comparing yourself to the broadest average out there. So what you're doing is you're racing to the middle. Yeah, and if everyone's doing that, then all we're doing is, you might as well not have 100 amazing innovative brands and organizations. You might as well just have one Uber organization. And it's not what organizations need or want. So I think we've got to go different.
And clearly you are. You've mentioned the benchmark thing a couple of times, because you provide a benchmark, right, within PX3. My question is always, in these things, people are fixated with having a benchmark, and I flip flop myself between, well, it's interesting to see what other people are doing, but really we want to focus on what's going on here. What is your attitude towards benchmarks? Are they in PX3 because you feel clients want them and need them, or do you really believe in them?
I'm going to be dead honest. Wear my heart on my sleeve, Andy, on this, which is the best benchmark you can possibly have is your internal benchmark. As a company, this is how we have performed. As an organization, this is how we have performed. And within our organization, some people are beating that, some people are on it, and some people are under it. So let's understand those that are beating the benchmarking internally. What are they doing differently? What can we learn? How can we take what they do into other areas? The people that are lower in it, what are they doing differently? What could be the influence? Internal benchmarking is a learning, it's a growing benchmark. It is that whole race to be exceptional. Everything about your organization drives you forward. External benchmarking, we didn't have it in our platform for probably 80% of our existence.
Mm.
And we put it in because it was a sales enabler.
Yeah.
Because when we were going out and talking to people, we were going into tenders, we were going into RFPs, requests for procurement, we were going to stuff, and they said, can you do external benchmarking? And where, trying to explain to somebody that we don't, because you've lost them. And
yeah.
What we found was, some of the advice I had is you've got to always be educating. You've always got to be taking people forward. And, we've done some work recently with a client who had probably the best case for external benchmarking. And, their view was, if I am dropping against an external benchmark, that I was on the external benchmark, it helps me understand, is it because we have a systemic issue within the UK that is affecting everybody, or is it something in my organization that is only my organization or our industry maybe? And the answer to that individual was, that's actually a really good way of looking at external benchmarking, but you are not the norm. That's a very mature way of looking at it, which is to understand, but it's not my key driver. And I think that's the problem. It's how are we doing against everyone else? Oh, we're doing okay. Well, then we just don't need to put any more budget into that. Well, then tomorrow you're going to have a problem.
That is it, isn't it? That is the thing.
So my view has changed on benchmark over the years, but to be clear, external benchmarking came into our organization to help our sales and marketing team open doors, not to help our clients be better. And it's a hard thing to talk about, because if I was here as a marketing individual, I would be sitting here going, hey, Andy, having the right blend of external benchmarking and internal benchmarking enables you to use our platform to understand where you are, both within, your industry and and our client base, and internally where you can improve. That's the sales pitch, right?
Yeah, but I would expect nothing other than honesty and realness from you, which is what we've got, which is
100%
what we're looking for, right? That's that. We don't want to hoodwink anybody. I think this is the thing about trying to understand this stuff. I think the point about internal benchmarking is great, and it really plays back to the here inverted commas piece that you talked about within the survey. What's going on within the marketing team? What's going on within the procurement team? What's going on within finance? Here's what matters. How are we performing, and how do we get better? And from what I've heard today, this is all about getting under the skin of how do we get better at delivering the outcomes that we need as individuals within an organization and an organization as a whole. If we can get closer to that stuff, we're going to be in better places.
You know that expression. I'm going to get this wrong. It's something like the most important person in the room, or the highest paid person in the room, or something like that. Their view tends to weigh down everyone else's action. If a CEO says it would be really interesting to understand how people with blue eyes felt, then everyone would leave that meeting going to people going like, do we have the data? Do we need to get the blue eye reports? And the CEO then wasn't expecting anything, but they've said it and it's happened. And I think most HR people are absolutely on board with the whole internal benchmarking is where it's at. The people who have made a throwaway comment tend to be the CEO, which is, what are we putting on our annual statement as our engagement score? How do I know if that's good? And then somebody's turned around and said, well, we'll create a benchmark for your CEO. And then it becomes industry, and it becomes an industry, and it becomes unhelpful.
There we are.
So we need CEOs to start asking questions like, how are we doing against the outcomes we want?
What a great question. What a great question. And leads us nicely, I say nicely, or sadly, into the bit of the show I call Sticky Notes, Nick, where I'm looking to try and get a bit of a summary on the things that we've talked about. And by the way, I've loved it, absolutely loved it. But we talked earlier about distilling things down to a single number and how dangerous that could be. In this case, if we're trying to find out what's going on and how we can take steps to delivering some of these outcomes, what 3 pieces of advice that you could fit on 3 little sticky notes would you leave for the listeners today, my friend?
So I put a statement on a sticky note that says, if we want to enable outputs, we have to understand inputs, with a little bracket that says, output alone is not the goal.
Nice.
Sticking at number 2 is probably a aide memoir, which is simply engagement equals what an engaged employee looks like here, not from a trade magazine, not from a supplier. What does an engaged employee look like here? And my third one is actually a quote from Rob, which is it sticks with me because it's powerful, or I think it's powerful, which is helping people think about culture and employee experience, people experience. So culture is felt by the group and experience is felt by the individual. And if people can remember that the culture we have here as an organization is widespread, and I'm designing experiences for the individuals, they then start thinking about the individual needs, the individual wants, desires, what are they giving up for their time at an organization? What are we giving back to them? So design the experience, aim for the culture. Design with the individual, aim for the group.
And there I am again. Something from Rob ends up blowing my mind. What a marvelous end to the episode.
Mind blower.
He is a mind blower, my friend. Nick, it's been brilliant to have you on. Thanks so much for the honesty and showing that there's a different way to do this stuff. I've absolutely loved it. If people want to find out a bit more about PX3 and the People Experience Hub, where should they go?
So they can head over to, we're quite present on LinkedIn. So they can head over to LinkedIn, search for the People Experience Hub, and we're there. I'm Nick Court, and you can find me on there as well. Our website is pxhub.io. So you can head over to there and you can access all of our things like ebooks. We've just released our insights report. So September 24 insights report has just dropped. That's our 2024 report. That's on the website, and there's loads of resources there around what we do. And if anyone wants to reach out, the contact details are all there on the website as well. We're quite a community collaborative organization, so we love to talk to people about what they're up to.
That you are, and I will put all of that stuff in the show notes so people can find it. Nick, thanks so much for coming on, my friend. I love what you're doing, and more power to you, my friend.
Amazing. Thank you, Andy.
Take care, my friend. Okay, everyone, that was Nick Court. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about him or any of the things we've talked about today, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forward. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Goram, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.